How do you know what you know? That's a question philosophers and theologians ask. It sounds headier than it really is, at least most of the time. And for the most part, it is one of those questions we don't think much about. Most of us just operate on a set of assumptions about the way the world works, and we know what we know. But in his analysis of Christians and Christian groups on the question of how they sort out the Christ culture problem, Niebuhr looks at a series of theological issues and charts the typical answers of each group to these questions. And today, I want to look at the first of these theological issues, the question of how we know what we know in the Christian faith. You'd be surprised how differently this question is answered across the church. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. So, how do we know what we know about the Christian faith? How do we know about who God is, who Jesus is? How do we know what we're called to do as disciples? Theologians like Niebuhr use a shorthand to frame this question. It is the reason-revelation question, or as philosophers call it, it is the epistemological question. How does knowledge that comes from empirical observation relate to what we know about God? At some level, all Christians have some belief in the idea of revelation, of knowledge that is not empirical but revealed by God, but there are many ways to understand revelation. Theology generally recognizes four sources of knowledge and insight about faith. In no particular order, there is reason, revelation, tradition, and experience. The Methodist tradition calls this the Methodist quadrilateral, and they call it Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. But most all Christian traditions recognize some form of this understanding. At the same time, different traditions understand the relationship between these things quite differently. For most Protestant Christians, Scripture is the highest source of understanding. Roman Catholicism, on the other hand, places tradition on the same level as Scripture. So, right from the start, we know that different groups are going to talk about the reason-revelation question differently. And when it comes to revelation, we mean a number of things. Our own Reformed tradition, among others, frequently speaks of general revelation and special revelation. General revelation is what we mean when we say that nearly all people have some conception of God, regardless of whether they are Christians or even know the Bible. Anyone who has stood in awe of a beautiful sunset, for example, and attributed that beauty to God, knows exactly what general revelation is. It's revelation that is open to anybody. It is the knowledge of God that we get through our senses, through reason and experience. Special revelation, on the other hand, is what we talk about when we talk about the Bible. Christians generally believe that the Bible is in some form or fashion a revelation of God. Some believe the Bible is the direct revelation of God to those individuals who wrote the text, and that the words of the Bible are the direct words of God. This is typical of fundamentalism, which believes the Bible to be factually inerrant in all its details, including, for example, its description of creation in Genesis chapter 1, which describes God creating the universe in 6 days. Hardcore fundamentalists believe creation to have taken place in the span of 6 actual 24-hour days. On the other hand, others believe the Bible to have been inspired by God, but not that it is factually inerrant or that the words themselves are God's words. These folks aren't looking at the Bible as a scientific tome, but as words of faith written for people of faith. Still others have an even lower understanding of Scripture as revelation. What Niebuhr does is to attempt to correlate the ways different Christian groups have typically thought about Scripture and its authority. What kind of information does it give us? Is it a science book, a law book, a book of moral teaching? A lot rides on how we understand what the Bible even is. And this kind of understanding, for most of us, is something we just assume but don't really reflect upon. What's at stake with this theological question? Well, it determines how we understand ourselves in relation to God, and to others, and to the world around us. Given that Niebuhr's whole project is about analyzing how different Christian groups have and continue to navigate the Christ culture divide, this is a particularly important thing to pay attention to. As we begin to look at each of Niebuhr's types, we will give this issue careful attention. And I think you'll be amazed at how differently different Christians think about it. Understanding this issue will go a long way in helping us understand and maybe even appreciate different groups, even if we ourselves do not agree with some of them. Tomorrow, we'll take up a second issue Niebuhr examines. This is the question of where evil comes from. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.